Hey, Chris, so let's talk about a fourth question you could be asking yourself at the end of every month with Google Ads, which is, are there core negative keywords that I should be adding? So the mindset behind this one,
Mhm.
Chris, the kind of idea is going to, and this applies to all match types, phrase and exact, and then also broad. But with broad, we were talking earlier, like, you got to be careful because maybe there's a search term you don't necessarily like that much, but the searches around it show that the person had the right intent. So, especially for phrase and exact, and then possibly for broad. But you look at your search terms for the last 30 days. You can sort by clicks or cost, and then if you see any search terms that you don't like, you add negative keywords to block those search terms. But the idea here, Chris, is that instead of adding negative keywords to block those overall search terms that came in, like that full search term, you get to the core term that is causing you problems. So, give you a couple examples here. Cheap moving companies near me, say you don't like that term because you offer a white glove service, a high end service, and anyone searching for a cheap service is not going to be someone you want, even if they fill out your form or call you and show up as a conversion. So you could add cheap moving companies near me as a negative keyword, exact match, but you could also add the word cheap as a what we call a core negative keyword and block any search going forward that has to do with the word cheap. And so, Chris, we have an example from the B2B world with payroll software you can share, but just generally, do you kind of like keeping core negative keyword ideas kind of top of mind on a monthly basis?
Yeah, absolutely. The core keyword idea um, is something that I um, consider my two-part process for adding negative keywords. The first part is to add the exact match of that initial search term that was unqualified. I like to do that because it marks it as excluded on my screen.
So that way, when you look back at your search terms report later and you're looking back over time, you don't have to ask yourself, did I add cheap based on that cheap moving
Right.
companies near me search term? And so if
Exactly.
you add cheap as an exact match negative, it'll show that that search term has been excluded.
Yep. It's a
Okay.
sense of security for me to know that I've done it, and also it shows the client that I've been working in this account. It shows the me reacting to the quality of traffic and removing certain things, and so absolutely I block the exact match, and then I block the core offending part of that search, just like you said with cheap. There's a million examples. I, I mean, the one thing I'm more interested in talking about, Jason, we could
Hmm.
add this just one question I have for you. So the answer to the question on this one is: should you add any core negative keywords? Absolutely, you should be checking for that at
Yeah, if you
least
can
once a
find them, yeah,
month.
at least once
Yeah,
a month.
just like you should be checking the search terms overall. Part of your process should be looking for keywords to add and keywords to block. So the answer is definitely yes. The question is, when you add, for example, when you said cheap moving companies near me, do you add that as a phrase match or do you add that as broad? Because I'll tell you, I always add singular words as broad match. Always have, always will.
Yeah, I mean, the I add them as broad. The only time I add them as phrase if they're a little bit sensitive in terms of like being very close to searches that I want. I kind of think through it, but it's hard to say you can go wrong with negative broad keywords because as long as they're very much not related to the kinds of keywords you're targeting, like the same kind of words. Because give an example, Chris. They give an example in their documentation. The word house. So they tell you if you add a negative keyword for the word house, broad match negative house, it will only prevent ads from serving on searches the term that contain the term house exactly. That means you wouldn't be eligible to serve on red house because it includes the word house, but you would be eligible to serve on blue houses because
Mm-hmm.
houses plural is a different word than
Right.
house. So adding negative keywords as that are one word as broad match, Chris, I think it's safe to say that that's the same as old school phrase match positive. Like any search that
Mm-hmm.
includes that term,
Mm-hmm.
just that term, um, whether it's that term on its own or any search with words before and or after it, as long as it's that exact word, you'll block your ads from showing.
Yep.
And so to make things easy and clean, yeah, like 99% of the time I'm adding keywords as a broad, negative keywords as a broad match.
Okay, that's cool. I'm just checking in because I know in the past when we had talked about that, you were really into phrase match, and I see a lot of people doing phrase. And from what I've read, what I understand, what I test, broad is absolutely the best way to go, because
the only time. Well, yeah, the only time you want. I'm trying to think.
So
why,
cheap. If you were to say cheap mover, I would put that as phrase, because it has a space in it. It's two separate words. Now, if you put two separate words together with a space as a broad match, it treats it differently. Absolutely.
Because, for example, Chris, if for whatever reason I didn't want cheap mover, but I wanted cheap moving companies, phrase match cheap mover would block searches that include cheap mover, but it would still leave me open to cheap moving companies.
Moving companies, yep.
And so those are the rare cases that. But if I'm going to add cheap mover 99% of the time, I don't want cheap moving companies anyway. But there's some rare instances where you want other searches that include one of the words from your negative keyword, and that's when you can add phrase on 2 word or more. But yeah, 1 word phrase is going to be blocking everything anyway. So you can do it with the broad negative as well. Chris, did you know, a little Google Ads trivia here, that your ad could still show when you have a negative keyword in there? You could still show on a search that contains that negative keyword if the search is longer than 16 words and your negative keyword is after the 16th word. So every now and then in the PSP group on Facebook, our Facebook group where people can request access there, people say, hey, I'm showing up on searches that include my negative keyword. And my instinct is always like, no, you're not. And then I respond to them, no, you're not. Check your facts. And then we get into it. No, I'm kidding. But I don't comment on those. But like, don't you always assume like they're wrong? Like they're looking back at old data or something like that? Like, how could you possibly show up on a search that includes one of your negative keywords, except if it's 16 words or longer and the word is after the 16th word?
It's actually not. It's actually if the search term is 16 words or more, period, and it contains that word. It doesn't have to be after. It's just in the search. And I did not know this either until about 2 months ago.
Chris, do you see the documentation there? Mm-hmm. Your ad might still show when someone searches for a phrase that's longer than 16 words and your negative keyword follows the 16th word.
But then,
so that means a phrase could be 18 words.
Because in the example it says, because your negative keyword is the 16th word in the keyword. So they actually contradict themselves in the example here. We'll buy each other a hug emoji or something like that. Okay, that's fine. We know who's right.
Well, we're both wrong. Basically, I mean, it contradicts itself. But anyway, Chris, that's going to be a rare thing. But have you ever seen a search term come in that included one of your that's shorter than 16 words? Let's forget this example. But that's I'll never play trivia again on this show with you.
You always lose.
So
got a lot of free time, Jason. I just go out and that's true. Yeah, it was I guess a draw. But I know if here's how I know. I've read this exact document, and the document states that effectively Google is not going to scan super long searches like that that are just a plethora of terms. They're not going to scan that for negative search keywords. They essentially just kind of let those fly by, which is kind of crazy that they do that. But I assume there's some kind of reason for that.
Well, then either that's not right or that first sentence is wrong. You know how I'm always like saying someone at Google needs to get a raise for like when something works out.
Yeah.
I'll stop there. But sometimes this documentation is a little.
Yeah.
it's a little
You,
off.
but you can actually hit the little exclamation point. Have you seen that? If you roll over the documentation, you can hit the exclamation point and say, "There's a problem with this," and you can submit a little.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
I've done that before.
Um,
I've let them know
did
my
it get
opinion on a few
fixed?
things. Oh, they don't
get
tell
fixed?
you. They don't say
Okay.
thanks, Chris. I mean, they just say it just goes into the void, and you never know.
But you feel better. Hey,
Yeah.
so shorter than 16 words, have you ever seen a search term show up that includes a negative keyword that you added within the date after the date range from the time you added the negative keyword after the date you
Yes.
added it? Have you really?
Yes.
What
Absolutely.
what was going on?
Are you kidding me? I don't know, Jason. I've been doing Google Ads since.
No,
you
but I
were a
mean
little
context, like
baby.
what kind of no you haven't. And what kind of no you haven't.
knew
What kind
knew
of
that would
what
make you
kind
mad.
what kind of campaign, like what kind of industry was it? Do you recall?
I don't,
And is
I
this
mean,
like 10 times or one time?
no, it's very rare. No, it's extremely rare.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I'll say that it seems to happen when I'm running campaigns on the Search Partners Network because you get those really weird, like long. Sometimes I even think it's like bots or some kind of automated. Like you click a button, it does a search for you for something, and it's programmed strange. I don't know. I don't know where it comes
Or
from.
there's
but
a
it's
lot of
always-
weird voice searches now too.
Yeah, yeah, that's that too. That too.
Interesting.
But it, it could be. I have no idea where
When
it
it
comes
happens
from.
to people, sometimes they get like emotional and they get really concerned that they have a
Yeah.
big problem now. I've never seen it, and then it sounds like even in the cases where you're remembering that you've seen it, I don't think you saw it, but where you're remembering you've seen it, it wasn't like it was a big deal. It was like maybe one
Yeah.
out of
No, I mean I
years
don't
and
care.
years.
And plus, you can't even react to it. You can't even block your negative keywords cannot be more than 10 words. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why I was adding a 10-word negative keyword or 11
Right.
word the other day, but I was, and
It's
I saw
like-
that. Yeah.
Yeah, it says you can't do that. It's more than 10 words.